accept that the third level is underfunded. What I want to ask each of the speakers is how they would go about changing that in very concrete terms, in terms of funding it and how they plan to go about changing that. Róisín, Shortall, I might start with you first.
Will I stand up or?
Well, whatever you feel more comfortable with. So
okay, well maybe I'll stay here.
I think maybe
if you can hear me okay.
Yeah?
Okay. I think we need to separate the two issues of cost of participating in third level for students and the need to invest in our third level sector. And I don't think we should be expecting students to pay for the funding of the third level sector. In the early 90s, free third level education was introduced. And progressively since then, the student contribution has increased to the point now where it does constitute fees for third level. It also constitutes a barrier for people to participate coming from lower income backgrounds. And I don't think we should have a situation where anybody is precluded from participation at any level in education because of cost. And that's what an inclusive society means. It means that people can participate in all levels of education without fear of a cost barrier. In relation to the funding of the sector, I think that should be state funding. And I also think there are big questions about how the training levy is actually used. And I believe that we need to divert substantial amounts of that training levy, which comes from industry, who benefit.
1.5 billion or 1 something billion.
And it's not clear exactly how that's being spent at the moment. But I think it's fair enough that industry and employers contribute to the third level sector so that they will benefit in turn from highly qualified graduates.
Okay.
Thanks.
I think there's a number of things we need to do in higher education. I agree with Róisín that it's we can separate how students contribute and how the sector is invested in. So we want to establish a dedicated department for higher education because we believe that the needs of primary and secondary are very different from research and higher education. We want to immediately invest 100 million to balance the shortfall that has happened in it. And we want to increase the maintenance grants by 20%. There's no doubt that research specifically is a key issue in terms of the ranking of universities internationally. And I believe that part of the problem has been that Science Foundation Ireland and the research prioritisation has focused more on the commercial benefits of research rather than strictly the societal benefits of pure and basic research. And so we need to address that, and that we would do that through rebalancing the board of SFI.
Okay, Noel.
I think one thing we need to do is make sure we freeze student fees. Absolutely, I think that's something we need to do. The second thing I'd say is we did try and bring about a cross-party approach on this in the Oireachtas already, in the Education Committee, about the future funding of the third level sector. Unfortunately, other parties wouldn't agree to do that. So we tried
no party agreed to do that.
Yeah, indeed, we tried to do a sláinte approach to education, and no party would agree to do that. I think that was a shame.
Including Fine Gael.
No, we proposed it, so...
Nobody in that Education Committee was willing to take any tough decisions. That was the reality.
Unfortunately, the Cassell's report is sitting there on the shelf.
It's gone. It's dead.
The third thing I would say is I believe the increase of direct funding is important. There's a lot of crushes in the education sector right now. There'll be a few PhD students in the audience, I imagine, here. In terms of their direct grant funding, for example, it's far too low. In terms of the amount per hour that they're paid, it's far too low. For undergraduate students, they're often having to take up jobs, full-time jobs in many cases, in order to make ends meet. We brought in rent protection zones for students, finally, after pressure from DCU, and that was right pressure, it was good pressure. But it was too late, arguably, and student accommodation is too expensive. So that's something we very directly need to address now.
Conor.
Yeah, so as someone who's just out of higher education last year and is a PhD student, I see the problems directly. 10 years ago, the student contribution that the state paid, the capitation grant, was €9,000 per student. It's now slightly above 4,000. It's by far, I think, the lowest in Europe. It's far lower than European average. What we do, we'd increase the funding immediately, capitation funding immediately to the OECD average, and we'd go beyond that after. We're the only party that have included in our costed alternative budgets each year, scrapping student fees in their entirety. I think most students, Noel touched on it, a lot of students have to work through college. Trying to balance the pressures of getting an education and working is a balance that's too far for a lot of students, and it pushes people out. I was here last year when Shane Shakedown happened as well, and something that a lot of parties don't talk about, the indirect cost of education, the cost of accommodation and living generally. So I think what we'd like to see is a state-led programme of student accommodation construction, not these private operators like GSA or the people behind Shane Halls and Court. We'd like to see state-led construction of student accommodation, and we'd increase the SUSI thresholds to ensure that more students can avail of those grants.
Okay, we have you. Thanks indeed for that, Conor. Dessie, Ellis.
Yeah, no, just in terms of the what the USI have sent out, what they've recognised is needed in the sector. It's virtually a Sinn Féin document, and I find that virtually everything there is what we have said all along. We believe in education. It should be free for all citizens. Third level education should be free, and it's unacceptable that in an area like this you have a very high rate of people not going to third education. You take Ballymun, you take Finglas, the poorer areas. These areas are suffering as a result of not getting the education at the highest level which they should be getting, and we need to deliver that. And we're not going to deliver it by tampering with the system, by increasing a grant here or grant there. This should be free of charge for every citizen, and that's the way we've approached this. And it's not true to say that we haven't been active on this. We have been very active on this, and we have pushed this for the last number of years.
Okay, Andrew, Montague, Labour.
Well, I have to say the Labour Party have a checkered history when it comes to funding at third level, because we were the party that abolished fees back in 1992 when Róisín was the party at that stage, but we didn't live up to our commitments that we made in 2011 to abolish them again, and in fact they went up during that time. So I have to be very careful in that when we're making commitments, that they're commitments we can live up to. So what we're saying is that, again, I go back to my opening remarks, we're not cutting any taxes, so there will be more money available for spending than the other parties who are going to cut taxes. So we want to use that money to, over the time of the government, to reduce those fees as low as possible. But for me, there's also another issue. People who are working at night, or who are going back to college, who are working, who never got the chance to go to college in the first place, they have to pay full fees. There's no recognition for that sector of our community. People who didn't have the chance at 17 or 18, maybe came back in their mid-20s, want to go to college and they're working, they get nothing. And that's the sector I'd like to see. We should be helping people who might be in a low-paid job, who want to improve their circumstances.
Roderic O'Gorman, the Green Party candidate for Dublin West, joining Dublin West, but here to stand in for your colleague Caroline Conroy. And I know you didn't have to come too far because you're based here, I think.
Yeah, thanks very much. Apologies for being late. I was just at Hustings in TU Dublin in their Blanchardstown campus, and addressing many of the exact same issues we're looking at here. Look, to start with, like Andrew, the Green Party won't be proposing any major tax cuts in this particular election campaign, because we see the next years are about investment, and one of the key areas for us in investment is in education in all elements of it. I'd love to be able to come here and say we'll get rid of fees completely in the next 5 years, but I don't think it's doable in the next 5 years. So what we're saying is cut fees, bring it down to the European average. That would about half it, bring it down to about 1,500. It's still a lot, but it's a significant step towards it. We also want to bring in free public transport for all students, so that's one saving to benefit all students using public transport. We need more capital investment, we need better infrastructure in our university. We're in a beautiful new lecture hall today, but we all know here at DCU and in many of our universities the infrastructure is absolutely crumbling. So in our pre-budget submission we budgeted 100 million extra for investment in infrastructure. And finally then, just saying it's relevant to DCU, 1 million extra for the University of Sanctuary programme, because I know it's worked really well here and we want to see continued support for that across the country.
I'm just curious about something Roderic said. He actually got up and said, not realistic to talk about scrapping fees.
It is realistic. We've costed it in our alternative budgets every year for the last 3 years.
Okay.
It can work, and we do it by levying a fee.
For by
on industry, the people who profit from our world-class higher education and research institutions. So it is possible. It's a poverty of ambition to suggest that we can't do it. Other European countries do it just fine, and they provide much better student supports as well. To suggest that the fastest growing economy in Europe cannot provide free education for all its citizens is just flat out wrong. It's a poverty of ambition.
okay.
No, just to say that Per Stardy has outlined our plans and our budget plans and how the money can be got to do this. It is achievable.
Lots of question marks. Lots of question marks about that revenue.
Well,
raising, though.
I disagree with you. I mean, we've a lot of places we can search for revenue, and we've also 4 billion in NAMA that's coming, and that will that can be directed towards housing. That money is coming, and
you can't use NAMA money to fund education.
Well, you know, we can change the remit of NAMA. Any government can change the remit of NAMA, and we can direct it. And we've also got other areas. The banks are not getting taxed to the proper amount, so we can also look there. There are many areas we can look at to get the money. I don't think the money is the problem, and this is constantly what's been thrown. But anyone who believes in equality and has Republican ideologies and socialist ideologies should be fighting for a public system that works for everyone, not just the privileged.
Okay. No, Rock, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, what I'm saying is freezing student fees. I think that's a realistic ambition and a realistic goal. I think the complete abolition of them.
They're the highest in Europe now at the minute.
They are, and what Roderic said about getting them down to the average, that's absolutely a laudable aim and a laudable goal. But I think realistically the idea of using what Dessie proposed there, which is one-off money to fund current expenditure, which obviously happens every year.
Quick word from
completely
the remaining speakers on this. Just Paul, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, as I say, look, this election has to be about offering things that you can deliver. I would like to move towards fees being, to have free fees. I also think it frees up many students to make the choices in the type of course they want to do that aren't linked to pressure from their parents. But realistically, we're proposing to freeze the current fees at the moment, and instead prioritise 34 million for the increase in the maintenance grant for those students who are from really low income backgrounds, and importantly, to restore the postgraduate grants as well.
Okay, just quickly,
The
Róisín, and then I will go to
the opening position is absolutely no increase. You start phasing them out over the next 5 years, in my view. We are facing into a situation where the whole threat from Brexit is a complete unknown threat. It could have very damaging impacts on the country, and I don't think it's right for people to be promising to cut things left, right and centre. We have to be reasonable about this, and we have to be responsible.
Okay.
So the aim is to phase them out over a reasonable period.
Last word to you on this.
Just we're talking about spending commitments, I agree with Róisín. My big fear about the economy, it's going along nicely now, but what happens when the next crash comes? We've got a national debt of 200 billion euros. People's personal debts are still very high. The interest rates in the ECB are at zero. We've got very little room for manoeuvre, so if we spend all our money now, I think we could be in a very severe situation when the next.
All right, I have 2 hands raised. I'll come to you in a second, sir. There was a gentleman at the very back, and then I'll over there. So, yeah. Sorry, yeah, can you speak a bit louder? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm coming down a bit in case you can't hear me. I'm not from here, you might hear from my accent, but I've got 2 grandparents here. So the main...
Very good point. So the main concern that I have is what are the parties going to do for older folks, and more specifically aged care, and also perhaps elaborate on what you're doing for people with dementia. That's what I'm going on about.
Okay, thanks indeed for that question. Noel, do you want to kick off there? I won't come to every politician on every question, but I will make sure you all get equal time. Noel, do you want to come in on this?
I think we have the fair deal scheme here in Ireland right now. Thank you very much. And you know, there needs to be an expansion and an extension for that. I think older people, what I hear frequently, are going to nursing homes when they don't have to go to nursing homes, are being cared for away from their home when they don't have to be cared for away from home. And we need to work out a way, and there are some details in our manifesto about this, about how we can potentially keep them at home, keep them getting home care, more home care. But in order to do that, we have to resource the sector properly, we have to recruit more home care assistants, and that's something that we need to work on there. In terms of having a proper dementia strategy, I think the current strategy isn't quite where it needs to be right now. I think we need to improve the offering there. It's quite clear that the numbers of people with dementia in this country is rising year on year, and that's a real challenge for the next 5-year term, because obviously people are living longer in this country. Our life expectancy is one of the fastest rising in Western Europe, and that's great, but it brings a variety of challenges with it, new challenges that we haven't had before. So we need to build capacity, add investment.
Róisín?
Okay, I think there's 3 big issues that affect older people. The first is in relation to healthcare, second in relation to housing, and the third in relation to pensions. In relation to healthcare, we have the scandalous situation where in this area alone, in the northwest area, there are 600 older people in their own homes who have been assessed and approved for home care supports to enable them to stay at home. They've reached the requirement in terms of need, and yet they're being told that, sorry, there's no money to provide health care.
Okay.
That makes absolutely no sense. Many of those people are vulnerable and infirm, and unless we provide the community services, those people will end up in hospital, and that's no way to run the health service. In relation to housing, we need to ensure that we provide appropriate housing for older people, so that people who are, were living in a 3 or 4 bedroom house, whose families have moved out, can actually move into more appropriate housing in their own local community. There's no designation of older people's housing at the moment. We need to do that and ensure that we have older people's specific housing provided in local areas. The third is in relation to pensions. Obviously, from the point of view of pensions, there needs to be certainty and fairness in pensions.
65,
it is wrong.
66,
it is
67.
wrong that people, when they've finished working 45 or 50 years, are told that they have to go in the dole because government keeps changing the pension age.
So a special payment for those people, not rolling back to 65.
We need to ensure that we don't increase the pension age any further, and we also need to ensure that we have a pathway to restore funding for people so that they can retire at the retirement age of 65.
Okay, Dessie, I'll briefly on this.
Just in regards to senior citizens, we need to massively increase the home care hours, and we need more home carers. That is a must. We also need to be able to look after our own people in their own homes and not be constantly directing them towards homes or otherwise taking them out of our communities where they've lived all their lives. That to me is scandalous, that if a person wants to go to a senior citizens, that's fine, but we shouldn't put it to them that they have to go there. In terms of housing, it's an absolute...
Who's telling them they have to go there?
But people are being forced into going into homes for various different reasons, because they're not getting the home care hours and they're not getting looked after in their homes, and that's a measure of a society. When it comes to the pensioners, we were the first ones that proposed a bill and have proposed a bill to take care of people at 65, retiring at 65. We are also putting the bill forward that if anyone wants to stay on after that, and they can go to 66, 67, 68.
Pension
But
time,
it is
pension time
important.
doesn't matter.
It is important to point out that there's a lot of people who reach 65 in jobs that were very manual or otherwise, and felt that was their, that was their goal. That's what they aimed for, and then they were left shortchanged.
Okay.
They had to go on the dole, or they had to go and get money elsewhere. That is a shambles. It can't be allowed, and we believe it should go back to the 65 for those who have done, in many cases, deals with their employers.
Conor, I'm guessing you don't disagree with any of that, Conor?
A bit to add, actually.
Yeah, go on.
And so I think on the pension age, I think it's an absolute scandal that it was actually the Fianna Fáil and Green government in 2007 that introduced the idea of increasing the pension age. After that, it was Fine Gael and Labour that pulled the trigger. So you had Fianna Fáil and the Greens loading the gun, and Fine Gael and Labour pulling the trigger on the pension age increase. We did have a pension fund, and it's important to realise where that pension fund went. It was used to bail out bankers and unsecured bondholders. That was money that people contributed to throughout their working lives, as money that employers paid on behalf of workers throughout their entire working lives. The increase in the pension age is actually a robbery of working people, and I think absolutely we need to reverse that.
That's a robbery of working people. I mean, we're living longer and longer. I mean, if we live,
we're one of the youngest populations in Western Europe. We have a third of our population are under the age of 35.
Are you
and
saying
we're the most productive
regardless
workers
of
in
how
Europe?
long we live, we should retire at 65, and that should be paid for? Let's face it, by
choice should
younger
be
workers who've taken the brunt of the economic recession.
Look, the choice is there. In Norway, the retirement age is 61. In France, it's 62.
Norway have got oil to burn, literally.
France, we're the fastest growing economy in Europe at the minute.
France is a train driver, you can retire at 51. That's not our. Shouldn't be. That can't be our target.
And if you worked in a physically taxing job, if you're a construction worker or a nurse or something, maybe the retirement age should be below 65, as it is in Sweden, as it is in France. I mean, the Nordic countries have been doing this for years. It can work. It just takes a progressive system of taxation.
Anyone else desperate to come in this? Okay, just very briefly. Paul, and then I'll go to the other
Yeah, well,
speakers on the other
first
side.
of all, Norway should be leaving their oil in the ground instead of taking it back
We
out.
don't disagree.
But can I come back to can I come back to the gentleman's question?
Grab the mic there. So
Can I come back to the gentleman's question? So we talked about the care for older people, and particularly people with dementia. So we've got two areas of spending, totaling around 500 million. One is to provide an extra 5 million home care hours to do exactly what Dessie said, to allow people to stay in their home for longer. And the second then is to bolster the Fair Deal Fund, which does need review and does need funding. And so both those measures will do that. And the last thing is on the dementia care that you mentioned specifically. We want to, if the USI and the Student Union ones are identical to Sinn Féin one, our ones and the Alzheimer's Society are almost identical in terms of dementia care, because we want to have better and more appropriate care for people who have dementia, particularly people who have younger diagnosis of dementia and who are in inappropriate nursing home settings.
All right, loads of people with their hands up. So we're going to try and get through questions a little bit quicker. So if you want to direct your question specifically to a politician, that's fine as well. The gentleman here had his hand up first. So
Yes, a big question to Paul McAuliffe, if you like. Paul, the last time that your party was in power, the ultimate consequence was to plunge the country into a period of austerity. However, your policies changed and we won't revert back to the way it was.
Okay, and I think if you look at the manifesto that we have, there's about 11 million that they're talking about in terms of the fiscal space. Billion. Almost 10% of that we're setting aside for what if, in case things go wrong. And as other speakers have said, we have a 4-to-1 split in terms of public spending versus tax cuts. And that's because we believe investing in our public services is the way forward, rather than narrowing our tax base. And I believe that's the lesson that we learned from what happened in the crash, is that narrowing your tax base actually leaves the country in a very precarious situation, and we're not proposing to do it again.
Róisín, very briefly.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting how Micheál Martin has been pretending that somehow Fianna Fáil is now a centre-left party. That he even tries to make out they're Social Democrats. But when you actually look at their manifesto, what you see is the same old Fianna Fáil. Back to tax cuts for the better off, subsidies for builders, and further privatisation of the health service. So judge them by what's in their manifesto.
Okay. All right. There was a lady at the back who had a question. Yeah, sorry.
Hi, I'm Helena Shane. I'm an emeritus professor here and I'm a voter in this constituency. A lot of young people feel a lot of anxiety about their future, and a lot of people of all ages have a lot of concern about a whole range of environmental issues, especially climate change. The Green Party are saying, if you want green, vote green, whereas other people are saying, if you want green, vote left, or vote red. Because the argument is that to understand climate change and a whole range of environmental issues, you need to have a systemic analysis of capitalism.
And your question for...
Yes, that's my question. I'd like to ask the candidates what their analysis, how they see the relationship between climate and capitalism.
Okay.
And would you please protect your voices a bit better for those of us
okay,
who are
I
back
could
here.
use the microphone. No, I'm going to go because Roderic hasn't got in, and I'm going to go to Andrew next because they didn't get in the last question.
Thanks. I think it's an important question, and I think if we take the measures we need to take to deal with the climate crisis here in Ireland, across the EU, across the world, we're going to live in a fundamentally different society. It's a society that will be one that is much more locally based, one which sees a much greater degree of cooperation, and that's why I suppose but there are a lot of steps to get us there. So, you know, in this election, there's a lot of sloganeering about how we actually achieve the solutions to the climate crisis. They're looking at so many areas of our life. It's our public transport system. It's flipping spending there, that we're getting 2/3 on public transport and only 1/3 on roads. It's changing it's supporting families in getting insulation into all their homes. That's expensive.
Roderic, go back to the question. Red or green to save the environment?
Green, absolutely green, 100%. 30 years ago, at the 1989 general election, the Green Party spoke about climate change in their manifesto. It was 2002 before any other party mentioned climate change.
All right.
Last year, thousands of people voted for the Greens in the European elections here and the local elections, and that is why so many of the other parties are focused on climate in this election, and we like that vote again, please.
Andrew Montague, this question.
Thank you. Look, climate change is an issue close to my heart. I have been involved in promoting cycling, in promoting better insulated homes since I was first elected back in 2004. For me, the big issue about the green thing is how do we make it fair? How do we make a just transition? And some of the policies that are being proposed to me don't strike me as fair. So for example, one of the biggest policies in the government's plan is to provide up to 10,000 in tax breaks and grants for people to buy electric cars. Now, electric cars start at the price of 40,000 euros. There's very few ordinary people who can afford electric cars, and if that's the centre point of our transport policies, to me that's crazy and unjust. So we should be all about promoting public transport, cycling and walking, and that's what I've been passionate about for a long time. Okay. The other issue that's really critical is about insulating homes. The coldest homes in Ireland are privately rented homes, and many of you are probably in them. And that's the one area that's been left out of governments and other parties' plans. We need to deal with people who are living in the private rented sector and bring up the standards so that they're living in comfortable, well-insulated, warm homes.
Yes or no to carbon taxes? I'm not going to dwell on this. Yes or no to carbon taxes across the board? Roderic, yes, carbon tax?
Tax and dividend. Give the money back to people. It's not about revenue raising, it's about changing behaviour.
Yes, as long as the lowest income are protected.
Paul?
Yes.
Dessie?
No carbon taxes, because what we have is
we
haven't got alternatives to fuel, certain fuels,
we have it,
and to impose taxes on people
Dessie,
and not think this out clearly.
Taxed 100 companies that have been responsible for 71% of all emissions since 1980.
Yes or no to carbon taxes?
Yes on the companies destroying the planet, no on ordinary people who aren't the problem.
Yes to carbon taxes, but done in a way that is greener and fairer, and that means making sure that by increasing carbon taxes, we don't impoverish people. And that's what happened in the last budget.
They don't work either. They're not effective. Quebec achieved a 1% reduction in.
Quebec achieved a 1% reduction, but the rest of the country went up by 15%. So it's a complete change around. So it's the most effective policy we have for tackling climate change. I'm completely in favour of it, but the money raised should go in to deal with the coldest homes in the country. That's why we would spend the money. We would spend the money on refurbishing the homes of senior citizens.
Gentleman there, sorry, you sir.
I'd like to ask Dessie. You spoke about socialist ideology earlier on, and you were talking about something else. How in God's name can you countenance going into government and propping up another Gael, Fianna Fáil government when you speak about socialist ideology?
Right, have your question.
Why don't you turn left? There's an opportunity to form a left bloc.
Sir, we have your question. We need to move on. Thank you for the Dessie.
Well, I've been a socialist all my life, and I believe in a socialist and a proper republic, and that's what I believe in. Now, to say that we have never said we were going into coalition with Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. What we have said is we want a left alternative. We've made it very clear. We'll wait and see what comes out of this election, and hopefully,
rule out Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil.
Hopefully, we certainly are ruling out it. But we certainly, we are. The alternative we're looking for. Hold on. We are looking for an alternative of the left. And that's what we're asking.
That's your first choice.
And that's our aims. And we will not accept the Tweedledum, Tweedledee of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. We will not accept it.
Well, you would re-elect Leo Bracker as teacher?
No, we never said that.
You haven't.
No, none of our party has
You haven't ruled out Fine Gael.
We have effectively ruled
You haven't, because I was at a press conference the other day where he put it to Sinn Féin. There's an historic opportunity in the country at the minute. The two big parties are on 42% between them. We could form an alternative government that would be an historic change for this country with a lot of the other parties here.
That's fanciful. You look at the numbers. You're a million miles away from
maybe not in this election.
No, we're not. No, we're not.
I think if Dessie ruled it out, maybe we'd see that change go a bit further.
All right, I'm going to go back. Okay, let's get on and let's applause. Person there just behind you. Yeah, sorry, the woman there. Yes. Thank you.
Hello. As you might know, DCU is the University of Sanctuary. The direct provision system in Ireland is an absolute shambles. I'd like to keep it broad and ask you what in the world are you going to do to fix it?
Okay, Paul, do you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, look, I think all parties are committed to ending direct provision. I think it's inextricably linked with our housing policy, in the same way as issues on health are linked with our housing policy. It's why I said at the very beginning that's our fundamental issue. The big problem for me in this campaign is the rising levels of racism that I'm seeing. And I think a lot of people are being encouraged to turn against each other because of the shortage of resources. And so I believe the solution to the direct provision is to do with the overall solution of our housing crisis. We need to have to remove people from direct provision. That's an absolute given. But to do that, we need to increase the supply of housing in the state. We need to do that with public housing.
Roderic, do you want to come in there?
I think, and having spoken to the Immigrant Council of Ireland, various NGOs, I think the way is to move towards social housing at the moment. We need to set up those that would be specifically designed to provide accommodation for persons in direct provision. So this would be own door housing where the individuals would have their own privacy, have control over their housing themselves. And that's where we need to go as regards providing for people who are in the asylum system. We need to make the asylum system more quicker so people aren't waiting as long. But in the short term, immediately, we need to implement the recommendations of the McMahon report as regards those in direct provision at the moment. And I think politicians, where there is discussion of a short-term direct provision centre in an area, politicians have to show leadership and not allow these so-called
just very briefly, you and this.
Okay.
You've been in government. I mean, it's easy to say the right thing here, but it's not so easy to actually get this right.
Absolutely, yeah. So just let me answer the question.
Yeah.
So Shane, if that's okay. So look, it's our view that the immigration system just does not work, particularly in relation to asylum seekers. And people coming to this country claiming asylum have a right to expect that the system will work and they'll get an early decision. That's the first thing. The second thing is that there's a lot of people who want to come to this country to work. We have a lot of vacancies and staff shortages right across the economy, and there should be a much better system for matching people who are looking for work with those jobs where we can't fill them at the moment. The other thing I would just say in relation to the existing direct provision system, it is a very inhumane system at the moment, and at a minimum, I think it's a bit realistic to say provide housing for everybody, seeing as there's already 100,000 people on the housing waiting list here. We have a crisis in housing, as everyone knows, but at a bare minimum, what we should be doing is ensuring that direct provision centres are provided by the state and they're not a way for private sector to make money.
Okay, a lady here in the front row has a question.
When I put the PA in that we pay the work disability for the half PAs, it's not enough.
Okay, disability, and sorry, just in relation.
Personal assistance.
Okay, Andrew, do you want to, thank you for your question.
Yeah.
Andrew, do you want to take that?
It's very important that we improve the services, and it comes back to the very first point I made, Róisín is on the same page, I think, is that this is not the time for cutting taxes. Much and all as I would like to be able to cut taxes, and so many of the other parties think we can cut taxes now, this is the wrong time. We need to be investing in services. We're at a crossroads, in my opinion, in this country. We've come through the austerity years. We've turned that corner, more people are back in work, there's money coming in to the exchequer. Let's invest in our community in a prudent fashion, but in a way that's going to address serious issues for people with disabilities.
Okay. No rock. Have you got your focus wrong in your manifesto in relation to that? Talking about cutting taxes when, as Andrew has pointed out, spending on disability has obviously reduced during the crisis.
Well, I think if we look at actions rather than promises, and we look at what we just did in the last budget, we had 2.4 billion to potentially spend in budget 2020, and we didn't. We didn't spend a penny on tax cuts. We spent some money on provision of services, some money on increasing services, but by and large, we banked that money because of the threat of Brexit, and I think that's something that's never ever talked about in the course of this campaign, but it is an action. It did happen. The money is there, and it can be used in the coming 5 years to fulfil promises. It can be used because it is there.
Okay.
So I think we have promised some tax cuts in the manifesto, but we've certainly waited 3 to 1. The same as Fianna Fáil, 3 to 1 in favour of service. Sorry, 4 to 1. Pardon me, in favour of service provision. No, we're both the exact same. Paul promised 11 million euro over 5 years. It's not the case.
Dessie, answer very quickly on this.
Yeah, no, just in terms of Féin and Gael, and they made promises before in the 2016 that they were going to cut the USI completely, and we believe that people now, their pockets have gone down. The USC. That's not what I said.
Some people don't want to see the USI.
Oh yeah, I know the USC. Sorry.
We're keeping the USI. It's okay.
I think it's very important that in the last 4 years, people's pockets have gone down, not up. People have lost a huge amount of money.
Sorry,
So
hang
could
on. The CSO figures
no,
actually
they say
the
no, they
opposite.
don't. No, they
They
don't.
do. They
No,
actually
don't.
say income
There's
levels.
less money
Net
in
income
people's
has gone up.
pockets.
That's the
But
CSO
I tell you,
figures.
if you come to Finglas or Ballymun,
Yeah,
I'll
but
show
sorry,
you the
but let's
people
talk
there
deal
and what
in
they
facts.
have and what they haven't
Let's
got.
deal in facts. The
Yeah.
CSO says disposable income has increased over the last
Well,
5 years.
it's
Is that before or
the
after
money
rent?
in their pockets. The money in the pockets of people has gone down, and that's the reality in areas that I represent.
All right, no,
So-
I'll come to you the next question, Conor. We do want to go back in.
So Shane, I don't think anybody answered that lady's question.
No. And
Well,
I was
sorry,
coming
well,
to
yeah,
take
well,
us on
Yeah, well, sorry,
about the
I give two
disabilities.
speakers an opportunity to answer.
Yeah.
I can't speak for the speakers.
None of them
so-
answered it.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Now, in terms of
Right,
disabilities,
go on,
I would say very
brief.
briefly,
Yeah.
you know, we need to be at a point where people with disabilities have rights.
Yeah.
And that's the approach that has to be taken. We need to move away from the situation where we need people out campaigning and lobbying in order for people to get the right to participate fully in our society and in our economy. You know, this government finally signed the UN CRPD last year, but unfortunately they didn't sign up to the protocol, which would make that actually a tool for implementing people's rights.
Okay.
We're still waiting for them to do that, and at this stage I firmly believe the only approach to ensure that people with disabilities can live a full participant life is to give them actual legal rights.
Okay, all right. Dessie, just very briefly now on that specific point about
Yeah.
legal rights.
there's absolutely no doubt that in terms of rights of people on disabilities, there's so many areas we have to look at. There's the area of transport, where people need with disabilities need free access. They need to be able to access transport, public transport, which we have to push more and more.
Okay.
Public transport is so important because and
know
the
that. We know why
deliveries of the
public
likes of
transport,
a
yeah.
metro and that is far more important than bus connects because
Okay.
in the long run we get more benefits that way.
All right, gentleman, right in the middle at the, well, sorry. close to
Thanks
the
very
back.
much. Gavin Brady, I'm from the constituency of Cavan and Monaghan, and I have a question for Dessie Ellis. In Sinn Féin's push for 2 seats in my constituency, they seem to be jumping on a populist bandwagon of don't increase the pension age. And every time I ask any of them, Pauline Tully and Matt Carty in particular, they're saying, no, we won't increase it, we won't increase it. But
No.
if you want to get into government, you must agree that to sustain our pension pot for the future, there will have to be some form of an increase. Now, I'm not saying it's ideal, but we have to be
Okay, all
realistic.
right, we have your
How do you propose in sustaining the pension pot for the future by the time that I'm retired?
Okay, Dessie,
Now, the position in our party is very clear, that we are saying that people who reach 65 and had entered into deals with our companies or otherwise, that has to be honoured. And if people want to retire at 65, and there are people in the industries and very manual industries that reach that, but we are also bringing a bill forward to say that you can also go to 66, 67, 68, well, but 66 at the moment, but 67, 68. So that there is something that the choice should be there for people.
Okay.
That's the position
we
of
have
the party.
I'm anxious to move on because we did deal with this issue a little bit earlier. Gentleman there in the sort of t-shirt.
My question is just kind of for Greens, Labour and Soc Dems. Brendan Howland said, I think it was either yesterday or today, that after the election he wants to form a progressive alliance with the Soc Dems and the Greens.
Okay.
But why are you not running together before the election and splitting your votes?
Okay.
And it doesn't make much sense.
Great. Would you guys not just all get along, Róisín?
Look, I think there's a lot of similarities between the parties, the centre-left parties, as you might call them. Look, I think we need to move beyond a point where Civil War politics is dominating Irish politics. And I think we're
Róisín,
starting
come on.
to see that.
Come on. The question was about the
We
three
are
of you. Come
working
on.
closely together.
We know who you don't like. Who do you like?
There is a lot of similarity. There is a lot of similarity between parties of the left. We have shown that over the course of the last government. We cooperate to a high degree in motions, in Dáil debates and all of that kind of thing. I believe that as time goes on, we will be working more closely together.
Okay.
I think there is still a possibility of a left alternative in this election. And I think the left has to be more ambitious than simply propping up one of the Civil War parties.
Andrew, yes,
And
yes to Labour
it may
and
not
Greens?
happen this time, but I'm very confident that it will happen in the next election at least.
All right, Andrew, yes to Labour and Greens. You guys are mad to get back into government, aren't you?
After our experience going from 37 TDs to 70 TDs, I don't think there'll be any rush to get back into government.
Tell that to Brendan Howland.
Look, I think that Brendan speaks sense. I think that if you were listening to the debate today, there's not a lot of difference between myself and Róisín, and in my whole political career, I've worked very closely with the Green Party. I think that the three parties together could form a significant bloc for after the general election to put forward our ideas. But I'm a centrist more than on the extreme left, so I'm as comfortable dealing with some of the other parties.
Roderic, I'm going to stick with the three parties, and I'll come back to you guys first.
Just to say, the Green Party and myself, I've always worked very closely with Labour and the Soc Dems in the repeal referendum last year. We came together indeed with the Socialist Party as well in my constituency to front together for yes and deliver a really big vote. But I always believe that I'm in politics because I believe that the environment has to be central in Irish politics. It's not the only issue, and the Greens have never said it's the only issue, but there must be one party putting that front and centre all the time, and that's what the Green Party is, and that's why I believe it's important that we must have a Green Party here.
Shane, I would like to respond to the Civil War thing.
You're here all day.
War's over, Paul.
I just think that line, Civil War politics, what does that even mean? Like, when we were writing this manifesto, did we think, oh, who shot Michael Collins and what way he shot? I actually don't know what that means. Like, what it means, what defines our politics is policies, not some historical factor. And actually, on the City Council, the coalition that elected me as Lord Mayor was the Soc Dems, Greens, Labour and Fianna Fáil. And we worked together very, very well.
We're not going to rewind the Civil War here.
David, I think I feel a bit left out by the conversation here because they're trying to exclude Sinn Féin now. Let us say this, that we will talk to anyone on the left after this election and see if it's oh, well, see on that. You might wish that, but I might.
You use your hand up for ages.
My question is for all the parties, kind of yes, no answer, but mainly you follow.
I like yes, no answers. Great.
Yeah.
What's the question?
Does your party plan to introduce like student loans such as systems in America and the UK?
Okay, all right. I'm guessing the answer here is going to be no. God, no. Absolutely not. No different decisions at all. All right, thank you for that question. Sorry, that gentleman. Sorry, that's right. And then I will come to you after that. Yeah.
Just looking at like their progressive but expensive plans that are in place, like local public transport issues, like Metro and the Bus Connects, and I just want to hear what you guys have to say where you would see them in the next 10 years.
Okay, Conor, you have been in for a bit.
So People Before Profit this year produced a fully costed eco-socialist manifesto, and in that manifesto we looked at doing, as other European countries have done, and introducing a system of free public transport. Now it wouldn't be an immediate shift to free public transport. What it would be a restoration of subventions to actually expand services too. Unfortunately, the last time they were in government, the Green Party cut those subventions and cut the numbers of buses on the roads and cut funding for things like the Metro North project that still hasn't been delivered. I think if we're serious about climate change, we're going to have to really prioritise moving towards a system that will take cars off the road and get more public transport, cyclists and pedestrians there instead. So on that question, I think we need to be ambitious. We need to move to progressive taxation to fund just transition and public transport. Quality, free, frequent, green publib transport is the way we do that.
All right, sorry, I should just say Paul McAuliffe had to be at a meeting in Dublin City Council at I think it was 3 o'clock or whatever. So he sent his apologies in advance that he would be leaving. That's obviously perfectly justifiable.
It'll be a very short council meeting.
You should have left it behind. It was a program. I have to let you come back into that one there, Roddy, because you've been accused of letting the side down the last time you were in government, basically.
Look, on the specific question, right now the Department of Transport spends 2/3 of its budgets on roads and 1/3 on public transport. So we say straight off, flip that, 2/3 on the public transport And that sort of capital investment will give us the money to put into metro, to put into the electrification of the commuter lines around Dublin City, to resource more buses on our bus routes, and clean buses as well. We need to move to hybrid buses, but also, and I think it's important, resourcing public transport in rural areas as well. Because when rural areas hear Dublin TDs or Dublin councillors talk about free public transport, they roll their eyes because they don't have any public transport right now. The car is the only option. And if we are going to move people away towards a low carbon future, we have to give them those options. So substantial investment in rural public transport will also be funded from that change in spending.
Yeah. All right, thank you, Aoife.
Okay.
No, Andrew's going to come in here.
Like everybody else, public transport, I'm completely in favour of it. But if you want a good bang for your buck, the best way to spend money on transport is with cycling. For 10 million euros, you can double the number of Dublin bikes, bring them out to DCU. Instead of giving 10,000 euros to people to buy electric cars, why not 500 euros for people to buy electric bikes? Let's have a proper, joined up, segregated...
Not everyone can cycle though, can they?
Not everyone can cycle. But like if you look at Copenhagen, 60%...
Lots of people can cycle.
60%... Yeah,
60%... Enough people to make a difference can cycle.
60% of all trips done in Copenhagen are done by bike. If we got 60% of the trips done by bike, think how easy it will be to get around the city that way. If we invest in e-bikes instead of electric cars, if we have a proper, segregated, integrated network of cycle routes in the city so that people feel safe cycling, so that parents...
Labour didn't do a huge amount about that when they were actually in government.
Oh, we did. We did a massive amount. Yeah, for example, we did...
too many cycle lanes around the city.
Well, any of the cycle, say for example, the Grand Canal cycle route was done by the Labour Party. We started work on the Royal Canal cycle route.
It works very well.
Yes, and I opened that myself, and actually was involved in drawing up the design of it. Okay. I worked on the design of the whole network for the entire city, and that was stopped by Shane Ross when he became the minister. All the funding stopped immediately.
Okay, Róisín, then Dessie on this, and then we'll go back to...
I think when it comes to transport, we need to start concentrating on moving people rather than moving cars. And that means reprioritising capital funding away from roads and into public transport and cycling, safe cycling facilities. And the reasons for doing that are environmental. They're also about creating an inclusive society so that you don't have to have a car to access jobs, for example. And the third reason for doing it is to improve people's quality of life. Increasingly, people are spending up to 2 hours a day commuting, sitting in, tailbacks of traffic. It makes a lot of sense to concentrate.
Sorry, Noel and then
public
Dessie.
transport.
Noel, you want to get in on this?
Yeah, I think one thing Andrew said, and it's absolutely right, e-bikes, grants for e-bikes is good. Grants for second-hand bicycles, good. We have the Cycle to Work scheme, but we need to expand that to second-hand bicycles as well in terms of fitting in with the environmental agenda. We want reused bicycles in addition to bicycles being used. Thirdly, metro's on the way. The test drilling has been done for Metro. The planning permissions are about to be put in for Metro. It's going to be shovel ready in either December this year or January of next year. We just had this debate this morning, Shane, of course. And finally, in terms of cycling, segregated cycle tracks are crucial. And we promised 220 kilometres of those in the Bus Connects programme. And that's absolutely vital. Regardless of what happens with Bus Connects, that needs to be kept. The segregated cycle network needs to be kept.
Okay, Dessie, you want to come in this?
I think it goes without saying that if you look at Metro North, you can remove 70 to 80,000 cars a week off the road with Metro. What that tells you for the environment is massive. So we need to push Metro. We need to push Metro into other areas. We have the Metro that should be coming into Finglas, and we need that Metro accessing the airport and right across the city. And that will have huge environmental benefits. And public transport needs to be invested in a big way, and we need to up it. And in regards to public transport when it comes to disabilities, there's a lot of people out there with disabilities are not able to access public transport, and we need to up that game.
A gentleman at the very back in the corner
what is got to do for
Hello, sorry, this gentleman's question is in regard to the situation for respite for people with disabilities. Courcelette was recently closed, a wonderful place, a wonderful facility for people with disabilities. And we have to say fair play to Dessie Ellis. You're outside the door, certainly you supported us very well, so thank you very much for that.
The question?
The question is, what the new government that comes in, what are they actually going to do for people with disabilities when it comes to lesbian care.
Okay.
An awful lot of problems for people with disabilities with their mental health because they do not have an option to actually have a break in their day-to-day life. We talk about inclusion.
Okay.
There's 99.9% of the people in the audience here are sitting. We're able to walk up steps and take a seat. This man is disabled. He's here on the margins. There's one other person down there.
Okay, great. Okay.
That's not inclusion.
Okay, Róisín, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, I mean, just to repeat what I said earlier, I strongly believe in a rights-based approach to people with disabilities, and that includes ensuring that they can participate fully. And also, we have to bear in mind that the families of people with disabilities save this state millions and millions of euro every year. And the least that families can expect is that there is a generous access to respite for themselves and for the person with disabilities.
Okay, very briefly, okay, on this, yeah?
Yeah, I think we have to judge society by how it treats the people who struggle the most. I think it's society that disables people, it's not people that are disabled. So I've been involved, I've supported campaigns in the past to increase the respite care grant. I've supported campaigns like Access for All Ireland. Today, ramps all across the DART network were down, people couldn't get on the trains, you have to give 24 hours notice to get a DART. These are all things, although we're signed up to the Convention of Rights of People with Disabilities, like Róisín said, we're not serious about it. Parties in the Dáil voted for it, but where's the money? The money was cut by previous governments. It has to be restored and it has to be expanded too. And I think the way we do that is actually in consultation with the people who are most affected.
Okay, all right, gentleman here at the front.
Many people who are in the audience today will actually be voting in constituencies outside of Dublin, and many of those rural constituencies haven't seen the same level of recovery post-crash as urban areas. So what's your party's approach to offering better employment, higher quality of living, and reducing the brain drain that we're seeing across the last 10 years in rural areas?
Do you want to take that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Well, first of all, I think we have a spatial strategy in place to try and enhance our other urban centres. So Limerick, Galway, Cork specifically, and Athlone as well, to try and bring more employment and more industry to those areas, and to try and allow for people to work and live in those areas. That's the crucial thing. Right now what we have is a problem where the economy is overly centralised on Dublin, where far too many people are trying to access work in Dublin, where they can't afford rent and accommodation in Dublin, and we need to try and spread those gains of the economy elsewhere. It's quite clear the economy is doing quite well, but we need to spread it far, far more than it is today, and that's what the spatial strategy is all about.
Okay, Andrew Montague.
I think one of the crown jewels in this country are the fantastic and beautiful towns right around our country, and so many of them are in decay at the moment. And I think we need to have a strategy for dealing with those towns. And one of the problems that they face is many of them have lots and lots of vacant units in the town centres. Some of them are homes, some of them are shops. With the move towards internet shopping, people aren't using the shops so much. So I think councils should be buying up those homes and opening them up for people to move into them. If we can bring people living into those towns, then people will start to use the services that are there.
People don't want to live in town. They want to live outside.
Some people do, but one of the things we can do about that is we can provide, people often want to build their own home. We can provide service sites on the edge of town so people can still build their home on that site, rather than having them out in the countryside. Once they live out in the countryside, they're as likely to drive to Limerick as they are to their local town. So we have to, I think that's a great asset we should build
One more on this, so very quickly. Okay, very quickly. Go on, Conor.
Yeah, so the farmers have been out pretty recently, and I was actually out supporting them myself. I've seen the Teagasc report showed that the average beef farmer in Ireland, before subsidies come into play, is taking home €8,000 per year. Most of those people are working second jobs and living a miserable existence. So they're actually, it's not that they want to leave the country, it's that they're being forced out of rural Ireland and into urban areas where there's more gainful employment. People before profit in our Just Transition manifesto I mentioned earlier have first of all, a plan to rejuvenate things like local post offices that were closed, local hospitals. I think if you reinvest in those services, obviously building more housing.
You're reopening local post offices?
I think they need to, if you haven't got a post office in a local community, have you got a community at all? And rural transport, there's post offices that were there before. I think the state should support those services because they're central to economic life in rural Ireland.
Every local community gets a post office.
I think you only have to look at how many rural people are angry about the issue of post office closures to see that there is a demand for these offices.
Okay,
They need
all
to be
right.
reopened.
Dessie, just very briefly.
Yeah, just in terms of, we really need to get broadband into areas throughout the country. And that is something that, you know, the government have attempted to do. Unfortunately, the deal they've struck isn't great by any means, because the state puts the money forward and then the private developers end up with the rewards out of it. But also the isolation that you found in a lot of rural areas, the closing the Garda stations. I mean, the mass closure between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael was 139, I think, stations closed. And even in this area, you only have to look at Whitehall station is closed, Santry station is closed. They're all centralised in Ballymun, and the numbers are less. Right. And the same thing happened.
Reopening Garda stations.
Not all Garda stations, but certainly we need to look at. There's certainly a huge knock-on effect by closing Garda stations and not having guards on the ground. Well, we don't know that at all, because we're calling for extra guards. We want to see 16,000 extra guards and 2,000 civilians, and release the civilians from the jobs that they're doing in the stations.
Róisín on this. I mean, is it realistic to talk about reopening post office, reopening Garda
No, I
stations?
don't think it is, because the problem is that in many of our towns and villages, you don't have the critical mass of people to support these businesses. And that's the difficulty. So we've had ad hoc development. Rather than having a clear spatial strategy and a strategy for building up our rural towns. Now, the way you do that is on the planning front. Too often we've had, you know, one-off housing built in rural areas where services cannot be provided. We need to have a strategy for consolidating rural towns so that you do get the critical mass of people to support local services and local businesses. Unless we do that, you know, rural Ireland is going to be denuded even more. And the other thing I would say is that in terms of rural towns, there are the same issues that you have in many of the city areas in terms of access to affordable housing, also access to healthcare and childcare, and we must ensure that there are better opportunities for working from home. That entails broadband.
Did I not come to you already? No, sorry, my apologies. You have had your hand up for ages. You want to ask?
There's a relation to. I recently had a phone call from a friend of mine who happens to be a member of the local Aldermalta. She's a taxpayer.
The local what, sorry?
The Aldermalta.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
She's a taxpayer. She's a non-national. She doesn't have a GP. She had to go to the casualty. Okay. In relation to GPs, I rang the DDoC to see if we can get her into the DDoC, and the local DDoC said that they don't deal with patients outside of doctors. So unless you have a GP...
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, you have to be signed up to a GP. And specifically your question?
The question is specifically what can be done to resolve that situation and take the pressure off.
Okay. Róisín, you're a former Junior Minister for Health. So do you want to
so
take that one?
there is a serious crisis in general practice. We have a real shortage of GPs, and part of the reason for that is that our health service is so dysfunctional. We now have the Sláinte Care plan that every party signs up to, which is very much about moving activity away from hospitals where it's most expensive into the community, and that's where people want to receive their services. The problem is that all we're getting is lip service from some of the bigger parties in relation to the implementation of Sláinte Care. You know, everybody says where it's at is in primary care at community level, and yet what this government has done is take money out of primary care. So we need to implement Sláinte Care in full.
I want to go to Roderic.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much. Look, you're right, the GP service is the absolute crucial element of our health service, and the huge pressures that GPs have been facing over the last number of years are forcing many of them out and making it incredibly unattractive. So newly trained GPs, they're going to Australia, they're going out of the country. And I suppose what we see at the moment is parties promising a major expansion of free care for under, I think, up to 16s. And look, that's it's a lovely idea that we'd like to be able to see. But GPs cannot accommodate those extra numbers right now. So I think it's really difficult for parties to be promising this huge extra workload for GPs without providing them with the resources, without providing them with practice nurses, without upgrading their surgeries at the moment. And again, I would agree with what Róisín said there as regards. Exactly, and that lack of oversight there as regards to Children's Hospital.
All right, we're running tight on time, so if we could just get through questions questions really quickly. Yes, sorry, get the microphone. Yeah.
I'm really glad the issue of healthcare came up, because one of the things I haven't heard today spoken about, which is a real problem in this country, is the state of trans healthcare. The waiting lists are terrible. It's just extremely hard to get services, and I guess I'm very upset about it because it's very interesting to me. But my question for the people is, are you aware of the state of affairs of trans healthcare in Ireland, and do you think it's a priority for your party to deal with it?
Sorry, I just couldn't make out the exact last.
Do you think it's a priority in your party to deal with it?
Yes, okay, no, thank you indeed for your question. Conor, do you want to take
Yeah, so I'm very aware, and I've been proud to support Trans Pride Dublin and sign up to the Tenny Manifesto pledge this year. I think access to gender reaffirming therapies and stuff needs to be, the age for access to that needs to be brought back to 16. I think trans people know who they are, and it's time the state respects people's identities properly by properly funding access to those services. I think there's 2 endocrinologists in the state that deal with trans healthcare at the minute. That should be expanded. It should be something that all doctors have to deal with. It shouldn't be an opt-in service, and we should be. We've signed a Gender Recognition Act as well. That needs to be expanded. Its remit needs to be expanded, and I think it has to be a consultative process that actually listens to trans and non-binary people on the way.
Okay, all right. Thank you indeed for your question.
Yeah, just very quickly, just to the candidates here. The housing crisis is very, very serious in this country, and I think we all agree. Will you declare a national housing?
Okay, yes or no?
Well, we've tried so many times with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and they never once went along with declaring a crisis. We put 6 motions to them, and they both shut them down in terms of housing. Well, I think it's very important to send out a clear message, but we do need to go on a massive programme of social and affordable housing building, and it's the local authorities should be given this job. That's why we have put forward a very ambitious programme, because this affects everyone across the board.
We know Sinn Féin have proposed that. No, we'll come in this because it is one of the things that the government has been criticised, its record on housing. Leo Varadkar said he admits you need to do more in this area.
No question. We can call it a housing emergency, a housing crisis. We can declare it, we can not declare it. But we all know it's true. We all know it's reality. There's no political point scoring or political gain to be had here. The question is, what are we going to do about it? We've set down an ambitious house building programme, built 21,000 houses this year, of which 6,600 were social homes. But we need to do more, far, far more. And we need to deploy all the resources and all the assets of the state, where at all possible, to build public housing, to build affordable rental housing, to build absolutely private rental housing, because that's where the genesis of a lot of our social housing problems are, is the over-dependency on the private rental sector. So we need to do a lot more, but in a lot of sectors.
Okay, you haven't even reached it.
Craig, yeah, absolutely. Declared the housing emergency, but we declared a climate emergency or Oireachtas a year ago, and not a
health emergency.
So the issue is the policies that we actually follow, and the key policy is the state has to become involved in housing in Ireland, like it is in most of the rest of the world.
A gentleman there has been waiting, I think, for about the last hour to ask a question, so sorry, apologies for not getting people, but we've a lot to get through.
Grant, thank you. My question very quickly is on crime. So I'm from North Dublin. I would say I'm from like a low-income area, and I'm just wondering what each party is going to do to tackle crime here, specifically, I suppose, in North Dublin.
Okay, Andrew, do you want to come in this?
How you doing? For the last 10 years, I've volunteered as the chair of my local drugs task force in Ballymun. That's where I live. And I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and the future of my community and the future of so many communities in Dublin is at stake. So what I've been doing over the last 10 years, I was Lord Mayor, like Paul, but I was the Lord Mayor back in 2011 and 2012, and I held a commission into crime and antisocial behaviour. And following that commission, I continued to work with the local superintendent, Paul Moran, and I set up a programme in our community where we targeted the 20 most prolific offenders in our community. Guys who were committing hundreds of crimes a year and getting away with it scot-free. We went after those 20 and we were able to get a good few of them locked up. Better than that, we were able to get a lot of them diverted completely out of crime. Some of them are working on building sites. Some of them, one guy's a chef in a hotel. One guy's managing a hotel now. This guy was up to his neck in criminality and he's now managing a hotel. The guy had been broken off from his family. We put him back together with his family.
So the lesson for the future? The
lesson for the future is to focus on the worst of the criminals and have a determined plan. But we also need to make, crime is very geographic, and we need to make sure we have sufficient guarded numbers where the crime is there to go after people.
Okay, Róisín, and then very briefly, Conor.
Thanks, yeah, I'm on the Ballymun Local Drugs Task Force as well, and we're very conscious of the fact that crime needs to be addressed on two fronts, and I'm talking in particular about drug-related crime. The first is that the special units need to be properly resourced to deal with the godfathers of crime and the kind of horrific, standout, obscene violence that we've seen over recent months in particular. That's the first thing. But the second thing that we need to do is address the circumstances that lead to communities becoming seedbeds for young people getting involved in crime, where running for a drug dealer becomes a more attractive option than staying on in school and aiming to get into college. So we have to deal with it on two fronts.
This is a very important subject.
Yeah, I know it is. And sorry, there's lots of important subjects.
I'm coming last on each occasion.
You're not getting even more than your fair share.
Well, I'd like to say something on crime.
Yeah, well, sorry, I'm going to go to Conor first.
So I think it's important to tackle crime at its kind of root causes. I was up visiting a friend the other day in the Den in Fianna South. Fianna South, along with Cherry Orchard and Ballyfermot, is the most deprived community in the entire country. The Den at the minute has 2 part-time youth workers that are funded through the Department of Justice Fund. They get 20 hours a week each. Now they're told to prioritise the repeat offenders, the people on the JLOs, whatever. What they don't have time to address, unfortunately, is the thousands of people that are disadvantaged, that aren't reached out to, that aren't included in society, and that see crime as more gainful than anything else. I think we need to develop a proper youth strategy, and also look at what the Portuguese have done by decriminalising drugs and tackling drug addiction and drugs as a health issue rather than a criminal
We're
one.
not going to get into decriminalisation of drugs because we'd be here all day. But Dessie, okay, I will let you. You're so
No,
enthusiastic.
I'm very passionate about this because I've been on the Drugs Task Force for over 20 years, the Finglas Cabra Drugs Task Force. I've been at all sorts of forum meetings. I meet with the guards. We have meetings regularly with the guards. And what I would say is that we need guards on the ground. And unless we get guards on the ground, we are going to continually face this because they have literally over the years withdrawn from areas. They've lost that intelligence on the ground where local people have faith. We need a visibility there, and it's extremely important that we get it. And I've been fighting on a number of issues. I tried to bring 2 bills through the Dáil on quads and motorbikes, and I was shot down by the 2 main parties, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. And that was to address an anomaly in the law when it comes to quads and motorbikes. And we are scourged by them. And we have forced, over the last while, the guards to do operations which have now removed 30 or 40 quads and motorbikes in the Finglas area alone. And that has been a success.
All right, sorry, that woman there.
Hi guys, one of the biggest voting blocks in the repeal referendum last year would have been students. It's a huge issue for us. Firstly, what did you vote in repeal? Did you vote yes or no to repeal the 8th Amendment? And then a follow-up, what is next for free, safe, legal?
Okay, Roderic, do you want to take that?
Yeah,
and maybe Noel, because you didn't come in back right.
I voted yes, and I was part of the Repeal Alliance in the Dublin West constituency. We had a huge campaign together, Greens, Labour, Socialist Party and Soc Dems along with Lion and Vineyards. You weren't in with our organisation in Dublin West. I'm not saying you didn't, Dessie. I'm not saying you didn't. Just saying what happened in Dublin West. What's happening next? Exclusion zones around all maternity hospitals. I think has to be the number one priority, and I think we have to look at the 3-day waiting period.
No briefly on this.
Obviously, we set forward the referendum. We set forward the constitutional convention that brought us to the referendum. No. I think we did it in such a way that actually allowed people to understand exactly what was happening rather than get dump people and do it too quickly. And I think it was actually a very sensible process, and I think people recognise the value of it. But sorry, to answer the question, what will you do next? Minister Harris is certainly absolutely committed to those exclusion zones, and we want to make sure it's legally enforceable, so we just want legal advice on that, but we're absolutely committed to doing it. And I voted yes.
What about the ownership of the maternity hospital?
All right, well, we don't have time to get that, unfortunately. Sorry. Gentleman there. And then, gentlemen, with the hand.
Yes, here to the.
And look, we all know, everybody knows, everybody knows how you voted at this stage. Come on.
Yeah, Shane, thank you. And I'm going to make this quick, just on behalf of my partner here, Annie Bourne. I know that, Noel, you brought in legislation in terms of ticket touts. I want you to be aware that anybody with a mobility device, in terms of a person with a disability, in terms of the private sector, the entertainment industry, a carer, an attendant that is employed or a companion, people with disabilities have to pay double, although they're being employed. So, for example, MCD will not allow a person with a disability bring an employee into the Tree Arena where they're charged double.
You have to pay for 2 tickets.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. Anyone want to come in on that? Yeah. No. Go on then. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, given it's yet another example, I suppose, of the gouging and the profiteering from these types of companies, and certainly what I intended to address in that bill, you know, is something different, obviously, but it points to the same problem. And the problem is that these companies are taking the public for granted and acting in a way that I think is completely disrespectful. So look, I take your point on board. There's something to be done there. Additionally, I put forward, I think, 7 pieces of legislation in the last all, including a plain reading bill to allow more members of the public to interact with the state and to be able to understand exactly what they're getting when they're reading and writing forms. I think it's on National Adult Literacy Agency endorsed that as well. So I've done a lot of work, but I have more to do.
Sorry, going to let Róisín do this.
Just to make a point, equality of access for people with disabilities is an absolute principle that is non-negotiable as far as I'm concerned. And the important thing is that it should be legally enforceable. And I also think it's important to note the situation that arose in this building, a modern building today, before the debate, where this lady here and a gentleman up the back could not access this premises properly because the lift was out of order, and that's inexcusable. That's why we need a legally enforceable right to access.